I remember I was home, right, with my babies. I was suffering. I was in a very dark place. But I remember I turned on the news and there was a story about a mother who had, unfortunately, she had attempted to harm her children. And I want to say that she had like newborn twins plus like a 2-year-old, like a toddler at home. And she had attempted to harm her newborn twins. And I remember it said in the news report that, yes, she had been diagnosed with postpartum depression and anxiety. Yes, she had recently started medication, but she didn't have any resources. She didn't really have anyone she could go to. Her husband had to return to work shortly after the babies were born. And it all just, it all just sounded so familiar. I could relate so much to it. But what prompted me to share was that you could say I made the mistake of going to the comment section, as you know, on social media. But I clicked on the comment section and it was truly so horrible. The lack of information about postpartum mood disorders, about mental health disorders in general, about mental illness. It was so apparent that there is such a lack of information, that there's a lot of ignorance surrounding it. And it was so painful to read those comments. And I could relate personally to that woman in that instance. And I just thought, like, this is why women don't say anything. This is why they don't say anything. This is why they don't speak out. Look at these horrible comments now, of course, from people talking about, just saying absolutely horrible things about that mother. And what I saw was a woman who obviously was, very, mentally sick in that moment. And I could just relate so well. And it really prompted me. I just felt this deep sense I felt this sense of anger and injustice that there was not the support or the information or the resources available for this woman. And so right then and there, I immediately started typing up my story of my experience. It was a difficult time for myself also. And one thing I've learned about healing is that when you help others, you not only help them, but you 100% are healing a part of yourself. And there's actually science behind it that when you do that and you do it in safe spaces, that is where true healing within the brain happens, is when people are able to tell their stories and share their most vulnerable selves with each other and know that it's going to be met with love and compassion from other people within a safe space, that it actually creates new neural pathways within the brain that heal trauma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I am your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and for today's episode, we have special guest coming from the state of Washington, Carisa Erickson, who will be sharing with us her journey from growing up in a place filled with trauma, negativity, difficulties, to today, all the struggles that she has been through, from anxiety, postpartum, but most importantly, she'll be sharing with us how she has been able to find a flicker of hope, and with that little flicker of hope, how she's been able to grow and to be the person that she is today. And before we get started, if you have not yet subscribed or followed the Truth That Heals podcast on any of the platforms like on YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, go ahead and give it a quick follow, and please remember to share this with others. Thank you. Hello, Karissa. Thank you for joining us here on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here.
Now, for the listeners, they may not be totally aware, but lately I've been trying to be more active on social media, particularly on TikTok, and it can be nervous seeing people on there live. I'm not yet there to go live on TikTok, but I scroll, I swipe down, scroll, and I'm watching these people on TikTok live going, sharing their stories. And that's when I encountered you sharing a bit about your story with the pageantry, with the competitions, but also you shared a bit about difficulties and traumas that you've experienced in your life. And that's one thing that resonated with me. And we started connecting. And now you're on the show to share your story.
Here I am. And it is ironic that you mentioned that about wanting to be, more active on social media, especially TikTok. I will tell you that every single time I do a TikTok live, just like you and I were speaking a couple minutes ago before we started this, I get insanely nervous. I will sit there for sometimes about 5 minutes before I press that little button that says go live. And so I was very nervous before I started doing any TikTok lives. But overall, I have had an incredible experience. And it gives you this platform to be able to connect with so many people. And whatever you're sharing about, you usually tend to pull in the people that it resonates with, obviously. There's
Mhm.
an algorithm and all of that comes into play. And so I've made some great connections on there. And that's where I met you. So, and here we are now.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And like I mentioned earlier, you were sharing about your life in the pageantry, but also about so many other things that you've been through throughout your life. Now, for this episode, I wanted to start this interview conversation with getting a better understanding about the competition, about this whole pageantry world, because I'm not familiar with it. All that I'm aware of is that currently you hold the title for Miss Columbia Basin or something. Is that correct?
I do. My current title right now is Miss Columbia Basin USA. I
Okay.
am preparing to compete for the title of Miss Washington USA 2024, and that's set to take place at the end of June of this year. So that's my current title. I have been involved in pageantry since I was 17 years old. I was a senior in high school, but really my story with pageantry begins from as far back, honestly, as I can remember. A fun fact about me is that I was born and raised in a very small town on the southern Oregon coast, like 2,000-ish people, the population, and a girl that had babysat me in that very small town had won the title of Miss Oregon Teen USA. And then she went on to win Miss Teen USA, the national pageant on live TV. This was like 1994, 95. And I watched her win that on TV. And I was already very aware, looking back at an extremely young age, that my home life and what that looked like was not quote unquote normal, that it was not healthy, that it was very scary, that it was a violent place. And there was something about seeing this kind of magical moment happen for another young woman who was from the same town as me that gave me this massive sense of hope that I also could accomplish great and wonderful things. And that's really what started my whole dream of, oh my gosh, I want to be Miss Teen USA or Miss Oregon Teen USA or Miss USA one day. So that was really actually what began my interest in pageantry in the first place, which is, funnily enough, basically is tied to the traumatic environment that I was raised in.
I find that very enlightening because you were sharing how, from the very beginning, from when you were very young, you were already looking up to that kind of, that sense of hope. And at the same
Yes,
at the same time, you're sharing that your background seemed to be quite the opposite. I
absolutely. Yes.
How did you find the strength to even get yourself into the world of pageantry competition when in the background in your family life things were perhaps one could say dark and the opposite of hope?
That's a very good question. I I do not know what it is, and I've always had this. I don't know what it is about me that has always refused to settle for ordinary or this is just as good as it gets. I truly just remember being a tiny little girl and knowing that I wanted better for myself and that I just felt this burning like desire. I mean, in the pit of my stomach from the time that I was a very young girl, that I just thought, I am going to make my life something amazing. I spent a lot of time daydreaming as a young girl, and that I know that that had a lot to do with the environment that I was in, that it was very much probably a coping mechanism and a way for me to kind of escape into this world in my mind where I dreamed of these great, wonderful things. And I really, really held on to that hope as I grew up in the same situation. It definitely did not improve as I got older. If anything, it worsened during different times, during divorces between parents, custody battles between my parents that were never ending, where me and my many brothers and sisters, where my siblings were really put in the middle of things like custody battles. And there was a lot of substance abuse between both of my parents, a lot of physical violence in my home, all of those things. And I just always clung on to the things that I knew I enjoyed. I really liked fashion. I really liked things that were kind of outside of the norm for my very small town that I was born and raised in. And I really do. I just think it was this dream that I had in my mind as something to hold on to for when I was finally able to be free of the circumstances that I was in, that I was going to go after those things and that I was going to create a better life for myself. I had no idea how I was going to do that. I just knew that I was determined to not stay in that same place.
Now, there are a couple interesting things that you mentioned. One of them is, again, hope. And another thing that I really grabbed onto was that you said that when you were a little girl, you were dreaming of big things. How important is it for you today to continue having hope and to continue dreaming big?
Having hope is literally everything. I can say from my personal experience that I never imagined, even through all of that environment that I grew up in, I never felt suicidal. I never felt like I wanted to take my own life. I never felt that way. And I never quite understood that. Again, I was young. I was a child. I was a young adult. But I did end up experiencing those feelings many, many times after I became a mother in my mid-20s. And the one thing that you truly have, even in those darkest moments, is, I mean, it is like the tiniest flicker, even if it is the tiniest flicker of hope. I am talking like you turn on a show that you love and it makes you laugh and something gives you this tiny bit of like warmth inside, or you look out your window and you see a beautiful landscape or you see a beautiful sunset even in the middle of winter. I would seriously see those tiny, tiny things even in my darkest moments, and I still saw the beauty in them. And I have always said ever since then, like, as long as there is life, as long as there is still life, there's hope. So it was just any tiniest thing that I could cling on to. It meant absolutely everything. It was what kept me going. Even if I had to say, tomorrow is a new day, I will go to sleep tonight and I will wake up tomorrow and tomorrow will be a new day and I will feel a little bit better in the morning. I absolutely know what it feels like to be at what feels like the bottom of the barrel or the deepest, darkest hole, and not knowing how you're going to climb out of it, but knowing that you want to, or that there is just still so much beauty in the world that I just couldn't bring myself to do that. And for me, 100% it was my children, the majority of the time, is what kept me having that hope.
What is the importance of your family? I know your children, but also your husband. How important is it having them on your team, rooting for you and supporting you? What does that mean for you?
It means absolutely everything. Something that I've learned through trauma and learning about toxic, dysfunctional family systems and generational abuse is that so many people, most people who have experienced that in their life, we all know, like, you don't get to, the whole phrase of you don't get to pick your family, meaning your biological family, what you're born into. We do not get to choose what kind of a situation that we are born into, but we do get to make our way through the world and find your people. How people will say that. We do get to choose, and we do get to find our people. So the family and just this little nuclear, it might be small, you know what I mean? It might seem so small, but my husband and my 3 children, that whole nucleus, like everything else, comes after that and revolves, outside of that space. But my husband and my children, those are my people. That is my world. And they are my home base. They are my strength. They are my reason. They're my hope. They're everything that I cling to when it feels like everything else is like outside of my control. That I have succeeded in creating a safe and loving environment for myself and my spouse and my children. And that in itself is the most successful thing that I can think of, coming from a background like I did.
Now, your background, you mentioned generational trauma. Sadly, there's also been, some abuse. How has that healing, where did that healing journey even begin? Did it begin as a child, or did it begin maybe later on in life, or you saw a show, or you spoke to somebody and they inspired you? I need to get my life, I need to lift my life up. What was it that sparked that desire to put yourself on the road to improve your life?
Without a doubt, that happened when I became a parent, when I became a mother. I was very aware. Felt like I was always a very self-aware person, a very self-aware child. And so even though I was very aware that the family and the environment that I grew up in was not healthy, that it was abusive, that it was toxic, I was able to recognize that. But once I was physically outside of that space, I just kind of, I was in my late teens, early 20s, and from studying psychology and being in therapy for the last 9 years, I have learned that it's very common to be a young adult and you just kind of think, okay, well, I'm out of that now. You think you've gotten over it. I've learned this. You think you've gotten over it. You're like, okay, well, I'm out of that. I've moved past that. I'm, able to kind of start building what I want for myself. And those are all great things. That's great. But you're kind of on the right path, so to speak. But I very much always knew that I wanted a family of my own and children. And nothing could have prepared me at all. Nothing could have prepared me for becoming a mother. And it really felt like I got hit by a truck. All of a sudden, and I have heard this from my own psychologist and many other women who have experienced this, who have trauma backgrounds. There is something that changes inside of you when you become a parent and when you become a mother. There is a lot of psychological things that happen in the brain if you come from a trauma background when you become a parent. All of these things that you think that you've gotten over, or even memories that you have suppressed, unfortunately. I had sexual abuse by a family member that I had suppressed. Things like that can be triggered and in your brain to come to the forefront when you become a parent. So I became a mother, and very quickly I felt overwhelming depression, anxiety. But I did not know what it was. I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that something was wrong. I just knew something felt very wrong within me, that I did not feel like myself. And honestly, that is what prompted me to ever search for a psychologist. I literally Googled psychologist in my area, and I picked one of the first ones that I found. And I always say that I hit the jackpot because I've been with the same psychologist for 9 years now, and she is incredible. But I was in such a low point about 6 months after becoming a mother, and I just knew that I was determined to not repeat those same cycles. I could feel myself feeling very agitated, very irritated, and not understanding why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And I knew how great of a parent I wanted to be, but then you suddenly realize, I know I want to be a better parent than my parents were able to be for me. I know I want to break these cycles, all the things not to do and that you don't want to repeat, but you realize that you have no roadmap and no direction on how to do that and what that looks like necessarily. And that is 100% what prompted me to reach out to a psychologist for the very first time ever. And from my very first session with her, my mind was completely blown and opened up to this whole world of learning about trauma and generational abuse and toxic dysfunctional family systems. And that completely, from that moment on, set me on a journey of healing of my own trauma. I started speaking openly about this journey, like you and I visited about before this. I started speaking very openly about that journey in 2015. And it was because I had already experienced that, and I wanted other people to know who were in maybe possibly in the same situation that I was in, that I knew what that felt like and how terrifying that was. And I just always say that it's, without a doubt, it is the hardest work I have ever done in my life, but easily the most worthwhile. I vividly remember my very first session with my psychologist, and it's, to this day, it's difficult for me to talk about. I was unaware that I was in deep postpartum depression, deep postpartum anxiety. I was not aware that that can come out in the form of rage and feeling a lot of anger, snapping at your loved ones, like my husband and children. I was not aware of any of those things. I had zero, awareness or education or knowledge about how it can present itself. And I remember sitting in my psychologist's office, and because they're required to, they have to ask you certain questions. And it was so terrifying. I remember her asking me, do you ever feel agitated? Like, yes. She said, do you ever raise your voice and yell in your home? And I knew I wanted to answer honestly, because I wanted the help. I wanted the help and I wanted to be better, but it was so terrifying, and you feel so much shame. I think that's one of the biggest things people healing from trauma deal with, actually, is what's called toxic shame. And that's from growing up in a trauma environment. You feel ashamed to even come forward and talk about these things, even though they were outside of your control. So I felt immense shame when I answered yes. And I will never forget that she said, as a licensed professional, I have to inform you that yelling and screaming is just as abusive, and it has the same damaging effects on the brain as physical abuse. And that was a very light bulb and a very aha moment, whatever you want to call it, and really kind of just knocked me down. And it was the hardest thing to hear, was that I could possibly be inflicting any kind of harm on my own children. And yes, it was terrifying. I left my first appointment with that psychologist, even though she was wonderful and loving, and she assured me that I was in the right place and that there was hope, and of course, all sorts of other things we discussed. But I remember I got in the car and my husband had to drive me because my anxiety was so bad at the time. My husband drove me. He was waiting for me in the car, and I got in the car and I immediately had a panic attack upon leaving my very first session, because when you decide to sit down and face those things head on, it is very scary. And I just so badly want people to know that it gets better, that even though it feels so difficult in the beginning, that it gets better, and you are not to blame for things that were outside of your control.
I feel like you're talking to me directly. I know you're talking to the audience, but I feel like you're talking to me directly because it is terrifying. It is terrifying, and there is that stigma by many that, going to seek professional help is something for the weak-minded, the weak-hearted. But it's actually the opposite. It's something necessary for many to find that healing. And uh, what would you say have been the fruits of you, even though it was terrifying, you found the ability, the strength to work it out and to stay in that journey? What have been the fruits of it?
So many things. I don't even know, I don't even know where to begin. But I guess the most important that you always want to start with is yourself. You have to work on you, and you truly have to put yourself first before you're able to be of any kind of benefit to anybody else. And so that became immediately clear with my children, was that if I wanted to be able to show up for them in the way that I knew I wanted to as a mother, that I was going to have to work on myself first. So 100%, like I already stated, the thing that I am most proud of is that I have been successful in breaking so many of the same cycles and experiences that I experienced as a child within my own home. I have created a safe, loving environment between my husband and I, and for my children. My children are comfortable with me. They feel safe. They are not scared of me. They don't live in fear. So that in itself, I could stop right there and be completely happy with that answer.
So
you know what I mean? If I just that alone, I could stop right there and say that I was most proud of that. But obviously, there has been immense benefits outside of that throughout my life, as far as professionally, career-wise, accomplishments that I could write down on a resume or a piece of paper. But for me, the fact that I succeeded in doing that, and that I did it with love, that I was a very angry person, which is completely normal, but that I was very angry, and I had so much rage and anger and bitterness towards my parents, especially. I am so proud that I continue to live my life from a core place of love. And that includes love and empathy for the very people that might have inflicted trauma on me, whether they meant to or not. And I am just incredibly proud that regardless of whatever trials and tribulations come my way throughout life, that I lead with love always. And that in itself is another massive accomplishment.
So it truly sounds that all that generational abuse, the cycle, you made the decision that that cycle stops now, and you've even put in the work. But something that I found very interesting is you put the work on yourself to, improve and to find that ability to shine and to hope. But one thing that I wanted to talk about with you now is you've mentioned previously, before in our conversations outside of this interview, how you founded some kind of something online to connect with other women. Can you tell us a bit about that project and what it is?
Absolutely. I founded it was mostly local. It was a local women's support group. And I did that because I was in the very depths of postpartum depression and anxiety. And it was during my years of having my 3 children. I had 3 children within 5 years. So it was a very, very dark time in my life, but that was also the beginning of my healing journey. And as soon as I spoke about it publicly for the very first time, and I remember it so well, and it was January, middle of winter, and really struggling, and it was January of 2015, and I decided to write a very detailed like blog type post about my experience with postpartum depression and anxiety. And the response was so massive that I realized how many women were just suffering silently, feeling exactly how I was feeling, which was, isolated, ashamed, because there is this stigma that is absolutely horrible that surrounds mothers that says that you can't speak about anything that's less than all the warm and fuzzy and great and wonderful parts of being a mother. So I just saw such a massive response, and I had so many women reach out to me privately who, they didn't want anyone to know that they were reaching out to me privately because they felt so much shame. And I just thought, what is something that I can do? Just anything from the, the small space of my home. And at the time, I believe I had 2 of my 3 children when I formed the group. And so I just thought, what can I do? And I think I even reached out through my Facebook. My husband and I are very involved in our local community. And so I just reached out and I asked for other women's opinions. And pretty much everybody said that we need support. We need a safe space. And I was learning these same things through my own work on myself through psychology. And so I created a completely closed, private support group where people had to actually reach out to me directly, or for me to invite them to join this very private support group. And I just created a safe space where women could share, they could talk to each other, I could post videos to them. And I ended up having like 200 to 300 local women, which I live in a very small community. So that might not seem like much, but in our very small community, that's a very significant amount of people. And yeah, I ended up with 200 to 300 women in there who we just knew that we were safe. We knew that we could share all of the things, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of our struggles. I was able to offer things like resources as far as helping connect women with psychologists, with mental health resources. I was able to help many women facilitate things like that as well. And so it was incredibly healing for me during that time, as it was a difficult time for myself also. And one thing I've learned about healing is that when you help others, you not only help them, but you 100% are healing a part of yourself. And there's actually science behind it that when you do that, and you do it in safe spaces, that is where true healing within the brain happens, is when people are able to tell their stories and share their most vulnerable selves with each other and know that it's going to be met with love and compassion from other people within a safe space, that it actually creates new neural pathways within the brain that heal trauma. And so I was like, this is perfect. I can do it from home. I'm home with my babies. It gives me support. It gave those women support. And I was just happy to be able to do it and to be able to help anybody else who was suffering, because I did not want a single other woman to suffer in silence and in isolation the same way that I felt like I was suffering.
And so this all started with a blog post. Did you expect the response?
No, no, that,
I mean,
no.
I
And
mean, you're sharing about, how like later on you were helping others get the the assistance, the tools that they needed. From day one, when you wrote this blog, did you ever envision yourself being on this mission?
no, I really didn't. And I remember in that post that I made, the very first one, I remember what prompted me to write it. And it was in a moment of deep emotion. And I feel comfortable, sharing this with you, which it's a very sensitive topic. But I remember I was home, right, with my babies. I was suffering. I was in a very dark place. But I remember I turned on the news, and there was a story about a mother who had, unfortunately, she had attempted to harm her children. And I want to say that she had like newborn twins plus like a 2-year-old, like a toddler at home. And she had attempted to harm her newborn twins. And I remember it said in the news report that, yes, she had been diagnosed with postpartum depression and anxiety. Yes, she had recently started medication, but she didn't have any resources. She didn't really have anyone she could go to. Her husband had to return to work shortly after the babies were born. And it all just, it all just sounded so familiar. I could relate so much to it. But what prompted me to share was that you could say I made the mistake of going to the comment section, as you know, on social media, but I clicked on the comment section, and it was truly so horrible. The lack of information about postpartum mood disorders, about mental health disorders in general, about mental illness. It was so apparent that there is such a lack of information, that there's a lot of ignorance surrounding it. And it was so painful to read those comments. And I could relate personally to that woman in that instance. And I just thought, like, this is why women don't say anything. This is why they don't say anything. This is why they don't speak out. Look at these horrible comments now, of course, from people talking about, just saying absolutely horrible things about that mother. And what I saw was a woman who obviously was, very, mentally sick in that moment. And I could just relate so well. And it really prompted me. I just felt this deep sense of, I felt this sense of anger and injustice, that there was not the support or the information or the resources available for this woman. And so right then and there, I immediately started typing up my story of my experience up to that point. And I had 2 out of my 3 then. So I immediately started typing up my story of my own experience up to that point, because I wanted people to see, like, hey, you guys see me all the time. And I was more than aware that people's outer perception of me was that everything was great and wonderful. And when you present really well to the public and you appear to have everything all together, people usually don't think twice about it. And I really, really, really wanted to break down that stigma. And so I just immediately shared my story. I left nothing out. I was completely raw and vulnerable and honest. And I did not know where that would take me, but I am so incredibly happy that I did. I've been able to help so many women and help heal myself in the process.
You mentioned something which really it hits perfectly for my next question about, the comment section. Unfortunately, social media has at times become a place where there is a lot of hate. You also see a lot of cyberbullying. But then you made this private page for women to have a safe place on social media. How important is it for you and for the community to have a safe place where you can all share each other's experiences?
Oh, I think it is. I think it's at the very top of the list of priorities. Actually, I would encourage and I would completely advocate for and have advocate for more of these social media platforms, right? Instagram, TikTok, Facebook was where I was able to create that completely closed private group, but I don't think that same functionality is available on all platforms. And so 100%, I think there needs to be a push and more advocacy for ways to create truly safe spaces and a way for those spaces to be moderated. You mentioned, you randomly found me on TikTok. I will be the first to tell anybody that I've struggled with being on TikTok. I go through phases. If you look at my TikTok, I go through phases where I might be really active for a while, and then I won't post anything for a long time. I encourage people all of the time to protect their space on social media the same exact way you would protect your literal home, like your home, your apartment, wherever you live. I encourage people to protect their online space just as fiercely as you would protect your home, because the massive amount of negative impact that it can have is detrimental. But just like that group that I was able to create that was private and was safe, and I was able to moderate that and have rules for everybody to agree to, things like that, to create a safe space. That was great. That was wonderful. But without any of those parameters, it can be very detrimental and hurtful to people who are looking for help, that are looking for help and are needing help. So I think 100% there needs to be more ways, avenues, mediums where we can create a safe space. I do not think that there is enough of those right now.
Well, thank you. I think that's a very good answer because it's true. There is a need for a more safe environment, not only for us, but even for well, I don't have any kids, but for the audience, for their children, because they are the future and they're going to be on these platforms. And sadly, it's sad to hear, but you hear about so much bullying going on in the social media world, and it's just a relief to find platforms or safe spaces. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to hear that you're at the front of doing that. So thank you for your project. Now I kind of want to shift a little bit. We've spoken about your journey going
Mm-hmm.
through hardships, and then now your journey with the online community. But I hear that you and your husband also help in the community, in your local community. Can you share a bit about that and how it is that you serve and reach out in your local area?
I live on the Colville Indian Reservation in Washington State. So I live on a Native American reservation. That means that as many amazing things that there are in a community like this, there is also, unfortunately, higher rates of domestic violence, drug abuse, suicide. There's a lot of pain and hurt here. And beyond that, just as human beings in general, it's been a good 6-7 years ago that I remember having a conversation with my husband, and he was a wildlife biologist at the time. And I forget what had happened, something in the news, something in the world as we know it in the last however many years. And I don't even remember what I had seen exactly, but we were, I think, sitting in bed together, and I just looked at him and said, we have to do something. And I remember saying, if not us, then who? I think so often people are scared and very intimidated as far as like, well, where do I even start? Or how do I, how do I be part of the solution? Or how can I help? How can I get involved? And I just remember sitting there and looking at him and thinking, we're just as capable as anybody else. And so it was very much, I just said, we have to do something. We have to do something to attempt to help and make an impact. At that point, I had already created the women's group. And so at that point, I was already very involved mental health wise. So I was already very involved with that, not only locally, but like my online presence as well. But my husband decided to run for what's called tribal council, which is tribal government, tribal politics. And that was how he decided to kind of get his foot in the door. And it was so important for him to make an impact within his community and with his people. And so he ran, and the first time he lost, I believe, by a small amount, and he ran again the next year. I won't even go into how difficult that is as far as if you involve yourself into being a publicly elected official. But to us, the importance of taking part in and becoming a part of the solution and like having a seat at the table to attempt to enact any kind of positive change within our community, it outweighed those negative things. And so we really held on tight to hope. We really held on tight to the hope that we could make a difference. And so he ran for a second time, and that was 5 years ago. And so he has been one of 14 elected leaders for his tribe, which is actually 12 tribes. It's the Colville Confederated Tribes, and there's a total of 12 tribes here included on this reservation. And he is one of the 14 elected tribal leaders. But for the last, it's been either 2 or 3, I think 3 years, he has also been the elected chairman, which is really kind of like the face of tribal government for his tribe. So very much kind of like the spokesperson, the leader of his tribal council. And with that comes so much that I'm sure it would take up too much time to talk about, but it allows us to be involved on not only a local level, but we have been able to form incredibly meaningful and important relationships with local, state, and federal representatives through various departments of the government, through the state. And it has just enabled us to be able to have connections with all these different people where we can enact positive change in a variety of different areas and topics. And so we're extremely involved. Honestly, like our entire, it's a whole lifestyle. Our entire life revolves around public service. And that's what we do.
Do you ever get a vacation? Because
No.
it sounds like, you shared about,
No.
that healing journey that, going to getting a professional help, then starting the blog, the group. Now you're busy with this, helping your husband and around the community. By the same time, in June, what's happening in June?
I'm competing for Miss Washington USA. I know. And I know you follow me on my social media, but actually just yesterday morning, I woke up to an email that I was accepted as a pre-law student. And so I'll actually be switching a degree that I've been working on throughout having my children. And I've done it from home, from online classes. I've switched that over from a psychology degree to a political science degree because of the work that my husband and I do. I really wanted to be educated on the social economics of all these different things and the best possible way to actually enact change on a policy level within our communities, our state, and the country. And so I switched it over to a political science degree, and I was just accepted as a pre-law student at Oregon State University. So I have that on my plate as well. And I also homeschool our 3 children.
Well, first of all, congratulations on being
Thank you.
accepted. It is just, my mind is trying to unwrap how how do you find the strength to get through the day? What's your secret?
I don't have oh, there is no secret. There truly is no secret. It is, I want I want things to be better. And I say that in a way that I want things to be better on all levels for all people. I want to continue to improve myself all through my life. To me, people talk about, right? We hear the term like, healing journey a lot, and we talk about that a lot. And I started using the word myself, journey, because I really want people to understand that there is no magical stopping point. There is no magical place of, oh, well, I did the work and I've gotten to this point and, oh, I'm all better. I'm magically healed and I have nothing left to learn. The second that you put yourself in that mindset that there is a magical endpoint and that you're healed and you're all done, that is the point that you stop learning and stop growing. So I don't ever want to say that I'm finished. I am constantly wanting to learn and grow and help other people and see how I can improve the quality of life for myself, for my children, for literally every single person, regardless of their background, their social standing. But I mean, especially marginalized communities are incredibly important to us and our family. It's incredibly important to me. People like myself who come from any kind of trauma-related background, I know what it feels like to feel like you're about 10 steps behind everybody else. And so anything that I can continue to do to shed light, give people hope, break stigmas, pave the way for somebody, coming up behind me. Anything that I can do to make the world a better place by using my strengths and my experiences and my gifts is a win-win for everybody. So I do not see myself stopping ever. I will just continue to be on this journey of life. And I think that is the beauty of it, is that it doesn't stop.
But I wanted to go back for a moment because you mentioned about little Karissa, how she grew up in not the best environment, but she had 2 things, and that was hope and that she was a dreamer. If little Karissa could look at you today, what would she say? And if she couldn't say anything, maybe what would she feel?
If little Karissa could see me today, I think that she would not only be proud, but I think she would not be surprised. I think she would not be surprised to see me now, because that same fire that burned in me at 4 or 5 years old is the same fire that burned in me now. That same passion that was so determined to make things better and to make things magical and great and wonderful and beautiful. That same little girl is still inside me now. So I don't think she would be surprised, but I think she would be incredibly proud. And myself, 36-year-old Karissa, wishes so badly. I mean, in my mind, I just would love to just, bend down and hold that little girl and hug her so tight, and to tell her to never stop dreaming, never stop pushing, no matter what, and no matter who tells her that's outside of like her realm, that she'll never make it, that she's too this, that she's too that she's too much, or that she's not enough. All of those things, I would tell her to not listen to a single word of it, and to just continue to be herself and to never stop dreaming and pushing. That's what I would tell her.
Well, thank you so much, Karissa. It's been an honor to have you on the Truth That Heals podcast. And thank you so much for sharing that beautiful message.
Thank you so much. It's been a total pleasure. And I love any chance, any opportunity I can to talk about things like this and hopefully spread hope and awareness. And I just always say that if it helps a single person, then that's all that takes. That's all it takes. And that as long as there is life, there is hope.